Press the red button, Barbara. Now read what it says.
Recording.
Thank you.
Okay, I thought it turned green when it was recording.
No.
Sorry.
Okay. All right. Let me see. Let's see how quickly let's see how much time this takes. My name is Duncan Adams. Today's date is May 9th, 2025. This is going to be a biography of my father, Harry Adams. It's predominantly for my daughter and maybe 3 or 4 other family members that may want to browse through this. Now, if anybody, this is going to be open out there on my YouTube channel, any subscribers, anybody you see, it's not going to mean anything to you. It's a modern day 8 millimeter home movie. There might be, if you're a World War II buff, there's a couple of stories that are kind of neat, but the preponderance of this is, pretty much boring, to be honest with you. From life to death and the things that happened for Harry Adams here in Indiana. Okay. As a side note, this was supposed to be a 15 or 20 minute, an hour ordeal, and this has turned into a half-day production making notes and this, that, and the other. And as a side note, Barbara, say hello.
Hello.
Yeah, my wife is up front, off camera, and we didn't rehearse this. I've got a variety of notes. I'm trying to encapsulate some things for a man's... I don't even remember, Barbara. How old was Dad when he died?
80.
80. I was thinking 82. So I'm trying to encapsulate some things for a man's life over 80 years. We made a variety of notes on the different segments of his life. She may chime in, so that's where we're at there. Now, I'm hoping I can do this in one setting. I was hoping to do it in a half hour. It probably won't work that way. I apologize to family members on that, and that's just the way it is. There'll be some points I'll just go over real quick, just kind of statistical stuff, and then probably some of the stories Dad had in World War II I'll expand on. Okay. Quick smoke. And I'll be smoking and drinking through this, having a little fun, I hope. And where are my glasses? Okay. And I'll be reading from notes, and there'll be some things that I'll actually have to take time and look over to read because the printouts are not that good. Okay, this is the biography of Harry Adams. Harry Adams, born in Vigo County, Indiana on June 23rd, 1917. Got a technical problem here. Forgive me. I've got to do a bunch of board op stuff. Come on. Just don't do that to me. I got to do a bunch of board op stuff along with trying to be the narrator here. Okay. Born June 23rd, 1917. He died March 9th, 1997. His parents were William F. Adams and Dora I. Adams. His father's birthplace was in Iowa, and the mother was in Indiana. Dad grew up in the Depression, and his mother died about when he was 14. And it was an impact on his life. I won't go into a lot of that. Dad talked about my grandfather, and now these are going to be some stories that he remembers, and this is the neat stuff out of it, as opposed to all the statistical born, died, lived here, lived there. So, and as a side note, I'm going to try and if I get off key, my wife's going to bring me back on track. I'm not going to get into all the friends that he had along the way. But I'm going to touch on a few family members because these are things that he talked about that stuck in his mind. Okay, dealing with my grandfather. This was the middle of the Depression, and there were different work programs out there like the NRA and the WPA and things of that nature. And there was, he was out of work. He worked in the coal mines and got laid off. He had 5 kids at home, so he went down to WPA to try to sign up for a job. And they said, hey, no problem. We can give you a job. You just give us you just give and whoever it was that interviewed him or was in charge, say, you just give me your word you vote Democrat and we'll give you a job. And he looked at him and said, you go to hell, you son of a bitch. I don't vote for no man but myself. And that took a lot of courage in the middle of the Depression to go home to 500 kids that had no mother. So I always remembered that, and Dad did too. Outstanding man of character. Dad talked about, they had an old Model A, Model T, and Dad talked about, whenever they wanted to go in town, you go out and warm the car up. And for us, we go out, turn the ignition on, let it run for 15 minutes, turn on the heater, and we get in a nice warm car. For them, warming the car up was literally building a fire underneath the oil pan so it would heat up that thick oil so that 6-volt motor or 6-volt battery could run the starter. So Dad always talked about that and stuck with me. Warm up the car. Here again, this is middle of the Depression. And Dad talked about it was either a dime or 15 cents. I think it was 15 cents. And he was able, his dad or whoever give him 15 cents. And he could ride his bicycle into town. I don't know where exactly town was. He grew up in a place called, Sandcut, Indiana. And that was outside Terre Haute. But him and his buddy would ride into town on the bicycle. And for a nickel, I think they got a Coke. For a nickel, I think they got a bag of popcorn. And for a nickel, they got to watch a picture show. And I think that was a tremendous treat for him to be able to do that. Back during the Depression, one of his brothers, Uncle Jess, who I got to meet and know a little bit, they're broke. They got no money. And Uncle Jess figured out a way to jump the power meter. I don't know, they probably pulled it. They didn't have any money to pay for the power. He jumped it, and Power and Light found out and came by, and I guess just gave them all kinds of hell and threatened to throw either my uncle or my grandfather in jail and this, that, and the other, and don't do it again, this, that, and the other. And he didn't go to jail, but boy, they were upset. But I think that happened a lot back then, and I think they knew it, and they, took it into account. And what good is it going to do to put a poverty-stricken father with kids into jail? There was a little more common sense back then. Dad talked about when he was younger that his brothers, he had 2 brothers, Uncle Jess and Uncle Carl. And I don't know if it was both of them or one of them or buddies, but to learn how to swim, they used to throw you out in the creek over your head. And he did. He made it and did it. And so, that was just, again, these are stories that have stuck with me to pass on that may mean nothing or may be little tidbits of minutia for the family members. Okay. He had 2 overbearing sisters he never liked. Didn't get along with them, didn't like them when he was growing up. And he didn't like them in his later years either. He had very little contact. Christmas card and a phone call at Christmas, that was it. I think I met him once. He just didn't want anything to do with them. Before the Depression really hit, if I remember correctly, Dad helped my grandfather in the coal mine. And to brag on my grandfather, Dad said back then you were paid based on the tonnage you brought out. And so the more tonnage, the more money you made. And you had to do it all. From what I understand, you had to do it all. You had to take the car down in there. You had to use the pickaxe. You were your own powder monkey. That's an old term for how they would, drill a hole by hand with a chisel. Just drill it in with a chisel, pack black powder in there, pack it in with a fuse, and light it and blow that seam of coal. But there was maybe 2 years, but I think only 1 year, my grandfather was the highest paid coal miner in the state of Indiana, which meant he brought out more tonnage of coal than any other man in the state. Let me see. On to the next. And as I said, there's going to be lapses here and so forth. I've got to figure out what I'm doing with my paperwork as I'm trying to go through this. Uncle Jess, he worked in the coal mines with my grandfather, and there was an interesting story he talked about once. I'm digressing a little bit. I'm kind of trying to keep it in the family, but they talked about it was funny. Back during the coal mines, you didn't have electric lights. You had carbide lamps. It was a lamp you wore on your head that had an actual open flame. And he'd talk about how they go down into the mine, and there was this one, cavity or room or whatever. And you knew what to do when you went in. As soon as you went in, you walked in about a step and then you dropped to your knees, because natural gas would seep into that room overnight and accumulate on the ceiling, and it'd flash and burn blue, and then it burns out, and then you go on down in the mine and mine your coal. So how things have changed. So anyhow, my father was a little bit miffed at my uncle. Dad went to World War II. Now this is getting into the World War II era a little bit, but I'm going to deal with it here. Uncle Jess, I don't know if he was the last son at home and they gave a deferment because Uncle Carl and Dad were already in. Uncle Jess may have been his age or something. I don't know, but he got a deferment. Or maybe he had, I don't know. He got some kind of deferment. And that always aggravated Dad, because Uncle Jess stayed home, worked in the coal mine, made all kinds of money, and Dad's getting shot at by Hitler, and Dad was always, he was pissed at him for a few years over that. But anyway, so there was that. It was just a humorous story, I thought. Okay, now, Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC camp, as they used to call it back then. This was a jobs work program for younger people in the United States during the Depression, and Dad got in on that. He was in there from January, February, March, April of 27th. Well, it wasn't that long. April 27th to April 27th, 1935 to May 11th, 1935, and that was what the date I took off, but it had to be longer than that because of everything he did. So I don't know what the whole thing was. This has to be wrong. He took some training out, and I won't pronounce it right, McCullum Hill, California. So I know he was in there all longer than 35. He was in there longer than a month. So the dates or whatever were wrong on the document, or I wrote them down wrong. But anyhow, he went out there for training, never talked about that much. But where he got shipped, they put him on a train, they sent him to Yellowstone National Park. And he said what they did out there, pretty much he didn't do it all, but he helped cut a fire trail, or whatever you want to call it, on the perimeter of Yellowstone. And they were out there and cut trees down and haul brush or whatever. And they were out there in the middle of the wilderness, and they had an old chuck wagon, Dad said, and you got 3 meals a day and all that, and I forget what they got paid. But he talked one time, different times at night, you're young men in your teens, and you're bored, and he said they used to go, there'd be bears come around camp looking for food, and they'd chase them. And they didn't chase them with a shotgun or a rifle, they chased them with pots and pans. Because they'd chase them and bang those pots and pans together, or a spoon on a pan, and chase them through the woods. And he said it was amazing. They'd chase them like into a box canyon. He said they'd just go right up a stone wall. So it was amazing. Nobody ever got hurt. They never turned on them. A bunch of dumb kids out of everywhere around the country chasing bears out in Yellowstone. He always laughed at that. And it was pretty stupid, and he admitted it. He did not talk much about the Depression, other than, he would talk about all the misery they had, different things. I won't go into it. But he did leave me a quote that never left me. He said, "You don't know how bad things can get." And Americans, and especially me, I won't wax on it. And he's right. I've been fortunate. He gave me a good home. And I don't know how bad things can get. He did. Changing the paperwork. Work history, if I can read it off. And I've got a bad print here. And this is his work history. And, God, I can't hardly read it. And I'm going to ruin the lighting here. I'm going to use a flashlight because this is such a bad print. And, okay. From 1940 and 1941, he worked at International Harvester. From 41 to 42, he was in the U.S. Army Engineers. That doesn't make sense. I know he's there longer than that. 42 to 43, International Harvester. 43 to 45, Army Engineers again. Maybe he went in and out. 45 to 48 says Harvester. 48, 49, some plumbing business. 49 to 52, another Vanderson plumbing business. 52 to 54, HC, can't read it, plumbing and heating. 54 to 66, Harry Adams Plumbing Company. That was the business he built. I'll talk more about that later. 66 to 69, self-employed farming. It was really, probably a little later than that. 69 to 70, he did get a job with a plumbing company in Paradise Plumbing over in, it says it's Seymour. I thought it was Bloomington. I think it says Seymour. And that was pretty much his work history. And then after that, he was retired. Now, if I can read this, I'm going to try and just pick out a couple of things here for historical aspect. And he's got them in reverse. He's got a more detailed list here. And give me just a moment to try to pick up with this and see if he shows it. He doesn't. He does show some of it. What I'm looking at is what he got paid. And I'm not going to go in. He had a variety of odd jobs before he got the job at the International Harvester. And I think my notes are on that, dealing with that. But this is just some of what he got paid. And in no particular order here. I'm going to try and keep it in chronological, 38, 39. He does it in reverse. I don't know why. That doesn't tell me anything. 1938, Terre Haute. He was working somewhere and got 30 to 32 cents an hour. 1939, another job, Terre Haute Products, 32 to 37 cents an hour. 1940, June 41, he got 55 to 65 cents an hour. He went into the private in the U.S. Army May 6, 1949, June 41, November 41. He got $23 a month to get shot at by Hitler. I find that interesting. Okay, on a little bit, if I can get some more. If I can find them, the Army, it doesn't say here. Can't see anything there going on. 42, 41. 42 to 41, pipe fitter, 65 to 75 cents an hour. October 42, 45. Something, can't read it. 50, had to be in the Army. $50, got 50, he got $50 an hour then. 45 to 48, plumber, steam fitter, $1.73 an hour. 116, started at 116, ended up 173 an hour. International, I think this was at International Harvester. So that was at Harvester. And then 48 to 49, he got $2.10 an hour. May 6, 1949. So that's just an idea of, for historical reference, what the pay scales were back then. A little bit of fun, if you will. Okay. Work history, getting a job at Harvester, dealing with that. That was, he got a job at the Harvester before he got drafted and he came back to it. But he told me about how he went up there. He heard they were hiring, he went up. And, the secretary, whoever said, and he goes, hey, I want to apply for a job, we're not hiring. Or something that, no, I think she said just wait. And he sat in the office all day. I think he got there at like 8, 9 in the morning, and it was somewhere around 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the, whatever you want to call him, HR it wouldn't be HR back then, but the guy in charge of hiring let him come in and talk to him a little bit, and he had some experience on doing things and so forth, and he got a job. But he had to sit there all day because they want to know how bad you wanted that job. And he wanted that job real bad. Okay, there's that. Let me get on. And that note dealt with going to the harvester and coming back. Okay, so Dad's went through all this. He's went through the Depression. He's went through these jobs. He's working at the harvester, and he gets drafted. Now I'm going to take a little break here. Let me see where our time is. 20 minutes into this. Probably be 40 if I'm lucky. And I feel like I'm going quick with it. Okay, part 2. Harry Adams, World War II. He was inducted June 19th, 1941 at Fort Benjamin Harrison up in Indianapolis. Okay, he was discharged October 21st, 1945, right down here where, Bartholomew and Brown County, Camp Atterbury. He was discharged down here at Camp Atterbury. 35-162-029, private. He was in the 701st Air MAT Squadron. I don't know what MAT is, but that's what it showed on his paperwork. MAT. 459th Air Service Group, and in essence, he was in the Army Air Corps. That's what he was in, Army Air Corps. Now, touch on this. He was listed as a rigger, and today's vernacular, and there may be different terms for it. Today's vernacular, a rigger in the U.S. Army is someone who packs parachutes. There might be a crossover term there, but back then it dealt with engineering, block and tackle, putting up braces, doing different types of engineering things, rigging things up to lift heavy weight or move things. So he was listed as a rigger. His training. He was sent out, I believe, to Camp Young. That's out in California, Mojave Desert. And he talked about that. Let me take care of got to take care of some house cleaning here. Let me get something set up. Sorry to do this. Got to keep things going to where I can see it. And there's this. Okay, hopefully that will solve my problem. All right. He was out there in the Mojave Desert. I don't know if they were, patent trained out there too. He never talked about him. But anyhow, he was out there, and he hated it. I'm assuming it was during the summer. He said they just have you sit around in a tent all day, hotter than hell, miserable, and then at night you freeze. They had you sleep on a cot. He said they just give you one thin little wool blanket. You just freeze. So you bake all day, freeze all night. And then every 10 or 12 days, they put you on like a 15, 20 mile forced march. And just, put the pack on and go out there and, hump through the desert and all that and come back. And then he says you're sore for 4 or 5 days. So he said he never saw, and that was all the training they did. And he just never saw it. And how he disliked the Army will come out a little more in this, I think. 20-mile march. During some time through here, and I didn't mention this in the other, and I'm sorry that's not in the first one. I should have mentioned it, and I had it here. Dad was married before he went off to the war. And I guess I ought to pick back up on the housekeeping. Dad was married, and he had a daughter from a previous marriage. Her name was Adela Ann Adams. She was born March 7th, 1943. The dates don't seem to jive with me here, but I'm just going by what's printed off. But anyhow, Dad was married, and sometime whenever he got inducted, or maybe before he went over or whatever, he got him a Dear John letter. We're getting a divorce and all that. So he was fighting that. And I don't know exactly when that divorce took place, but before he made the jump over to England, or the boat ride to England, he was going through a divorce or had been divorced. And of course, he's not able to defend himself or go to court or anything, so it was pretty much a divorce in absentia, I'm sure. But anyway, sorry, I left that out. And I mentioned my half-sister there. Glad I did that. While he was going through more training over on the East Coast, over in Pennsylvania, he met my mother, Dolores May. And they hit it off and wrote letters back and forth while he was overseas. And more on that, on how they got together, went in later on in this. When he was over there, he mentioned one time some of the training they did. And he always talked about how ridiculous the training was. The Susquehanna River, the big river that flows through Pennsylvania, and I think there are different portions. It gets real shallow, like a mile or 2 miles wide. They had him and like 5 or 6 other guys drag some form of artillery gun by hand across that damn river. He said, I never could figure out what they were doing. Why did they do this? And he said the problem would be you'd roll it over a boulder and then it'd fall on the other side and that tongue would slap back and forth and knock you into the river. And he goes, I can't believe nobody broke a leg. And they had to drag that across that river. And he always talked about that. He just, why? Why did they do that? It meant no sense to him. But it was something he talked about and stuck in his mind, so I'm passing it on here for historical. Okay, on to the next one. So, Dad meets Mom, and I think the situation there was, I think he had a buddy in the unit or something that was going out with one of Mom's cousins or one of her friends or something, and hey, come on down, let's go see the picture show or go to USO or whatever. Anyhow, that's how they got together. That's my best memory on how they got together. I should have said this at the beginning. All this is from best memory. Dad passing it on to me 40, 50 years ago, and then however time erodes the memory and whatever. So don't take any of this for gospel. I should have said that at the beginning. Okay, so Dad's went through all this. He's went through Camp Young. He's done this stuff out in Pennsylvania. Boot camp. I don't know where he took boot camp. I didn't even look for it. And so they take the boat they take the boat ride over to England because they haven't, D-Day hasn't happened yet. Take the boat ride to England. He gets over there, and he's over there during some of the Blitz. And he talked about that. He said it was unbelievable. He said no 4th of July fireworks can compare to it. He goes, you just cannot believe, between the bombs falling and the tracers and the spotlights and everything, he said, you just can't describe it. He talked about how whenever the Germans would come in with their aircraft, if the British got the spotlight on one of the planes, they never got away from them. He said they just didn't matter how they looped around, did whatever. He said they never got away from them. I don't know that they always not. He didn't talk like they always shot them down. He said most of the time they did. But they could never get away from them. And Dad never talked like he went into the subway shelters or anything like that. He never mentioned that. Maybe he did. But he was there for part of the Blitz. He got to see that. Okay. So we're in England. We've seen the Blitz. D-Day has happened. Dad doesn't go in. First off, Dad said he went in D-Day +6. Still a lot of action going on. People don't realize that. But he went in D-Day +6. Said he walked across Normandy Beach. Don't know if he did. He may have been just generic in that. But got on a boat, probably a Higgins boat. And they come up and he walks across the shore and in you go. You're going in there. And he talked about on the way in, they had the GI's column of twos on each side of the road, walking into the battle, or going toward the front line. And he said there'd be a column of trucks heading back to the beach, deuce and a half. And he said they go past you. They had the canvas covers on and everything. They go past you. You take a glance and look in. There was nothing but dismembered, dead bodies and dismembered bodies. and you're walking forward to go where they came from. He said it was not a comforting feeling. So that was something. Talked about one time, and a lot of this with the World War II will not be in the chronological order. I'm just going off memory. Talked about one time they went through some French town. I guess, I don't know that they liberated it, but, the GI liberated the town. And, of course, the French are, throwing you cheese and doing this. Well, they got a hold of a case. Somehow they got a hold of a case of champagne. And, warm champagne, or maybe, who knows what ferment stage it was in. He said him and a couple other guys drank damn near that whole case that night. And I don't think they did too well with that. The way he talked, they got pretty sick. But anyhow, that was just one of the things that he talked about while he was over there. He did not make any friends, and I'll skip over that. He did not make any friends over there. Most everybody else I've met, my wife's father and brothers, or uncles, her uncles, and different men I've read from World War II, always had one or two buddies that they, if they didn't get killed in action, they were close to. And they, Christmas cards or see each other once a year or whatever. Dad never had any friends. Now, I don't know, but he talked about talking about a buddy. He didn't really say he had a buddy get killed, but it could work on you. He alluded to it. So I think he had somebody over there with a good buddy and got killed, and he just never made any more friends. I don't know that. That's my supposition. He also talked about looking in the tanks once they get hit with the artillery shells. He said the crematorium, and that stuck with him. Just burned bodies in there and that type of thing. So he saw his share of horror over there. He just wasn't in the back, separated from it. I did touch on the no friends. I'm going to touch on this real quick. It's his brother Carl. His eldest brother Carl was in World War II, and I never really met him, but I guess Dad said he helped liberate a couple of concentration camps, came back a heavy drinker, and never talked about it. So there was that in the family. I'm sure he and Dad talked, but whatever. Never made any friends. This is the story of the exploding truck. Let me look at the notes. This is one of Dad's better stories. I don't know how far into the war they are. I'm going to check some things here, and hopefully everything will keep rolling for us here. I don't know how far into the war it was. I don't know if they were a month in or whatever. Doesn't matter. Dad was in some kind of convoy. Don't know how big. Dozen trucks, 100 trucks. Don't know. It wasn't 2 or 3. And they're coming up on a crossroad. I guess in Germany. Well, it might be France. I don't know. France, Germany, don't matter. And they come up on a crossroad, and coming across their path is a German truck, maybe 2. And somebody opens up on it. I think a tank opened up on it with a shell. And when it hit it, it just exploded. It must have had ordnance or who knows what on it. And it exploded. Well, when it exploded, it blew either the passenger or the driver out of the cab. So he's thrown out into the field, and he's on fire. But he's mobile. So he gets up and tries to put the fire out. And all these GIs in this convoy open up on him. Everybody grabbed the rifle. Dad said there was this old sergeant, he just couldn't stand within a deuce and a half or something, and got on that 50 caliber and just started pouring the lead on him. And everybody's shooting at him. I don't know, 50 guys or more, whatever, I don't know. And they're all shooting at him, and nobody's hitting him. And the bullets are pinging around him, and the dust is flying or the dirt's flying. And so he takes off running, zigzagging through the field, trying not to get shot. But he's still on fire. Well, the damn fire gets to him, so he gets down and tries to roll on his back or wherever and try to put it out. And then the GIs zero in on him, so he's got to get up and run again. And then after 2 or 3 times of doing this, I don't know how long it lasted, somebody figured out, wait a minute, we got to crouch that just got blowed out of a truck 20 foot in the air. He's running without a gun and he's on fire. How's he going to hurt us? And somebody called ceasefire, and it took them a few seconds, and they got everybody to settle down. And a couple of GIs walk out there, and they take him prisoner. He was all but too happy to come in. Well, they get him in there, and I don't know if he was in Dad's truck or not, but I think he was. And they get him in there and put him in the back of this deuce and a half. And, of course, this is relatively new into the war, and they're going to kill Hitler, and every German's a rotten kraut, and, the whole bit, and everybody's jacked up. Well, Dad said a couple of the guys were sticking bayonets in his face and threatening him and doing all this. They're talking about, and this poor guy, he's burnt and been shot at, and Dad said the only wound he had, out of all these guys shooting at him, he had a graze across the bridge of his nose. That was it. He got blowed up, set on fire, shot at by 50 or 100 guys, and pretty much walked away from it. Hand of God, if you will. Well, anyhow, these guys are threatening him and roughing him up and this, that, and the other. And he either knew I think he knew a little bit of English. I don't know if anybody knew any German in the truck, but they were able to communicate some. And he got telling about how he hated Hitler and hated the war, and he just wanted to go home and all that. Within 30 minutes, they're giving him C rations and chocolate bars, and before that, they wanted to run a bayonet through him. And Dad always talked about that. I thought that was a good human interest story. I wanted to share that, because that was something Dad had. Okay, story of the kraut blown out of the truck. Siegfried Line. That's not in Dad's paperwork, but he was at the Siegfried Line. And let's see, take him way longer than I wanted to. Hopefully I can condense this down. Dad was at the Siegfried Line. You have to go do your history on that. There were more casualties at the Siegfried Line than there was Normandy, or was the invasion of Normandy, if you will. It was bad. It was a bad thing. But anyhow, there's two stories here. One, and I told this at Dad's eulogy, which I gave. The Siegfried Line are like small pyramids of concrete to stop tanks. And you just need to go out and look at a picture of it to understand what it was a heavily fortified line. And there was a field, a couple 100-yard field. And they needed GI to get up there and blow up those they call them dragon's teeth or tank teeth. Concrete pyramids. So Dad got the wonderful job of putting on about 35 to 40 pounds of TNT on his back, and they look at him and say, "Run." And he's running through this field toward that emplacement, and there's a hill in behind the emplacement, and there's German machine gun nests and pillboxes that have artillery guns and all. Well, they're shooting at you. So he makes it across there, and he jumps into the ditch that's in front of it. And all he sees on each side of him is either dead or dying GIs. Because a bunch of guys had gotten sent up there, and they got shot. And they didn't make it. Dad did. So he's up there for a while. I don't know how long. Could be an hour, could be a half a day, whatever. And somehow they call a ceasefire. And off in the distance is this rickety old U.S. Army Air Corps ambulance. And it's winding through the valley coming down. Nobody's shooting at it. And the ambulance driver gets down there, and Dad said he's just scared to death. Well, why shouldn't he be? A couple of 100 yards behind the emplacement is this bunker up there with an artillery gun, one shell, and they just disintegrate you. They didn't shoot. And that guy was out there, and I don't know how many litters or how many men it could take, but they were all, there was a lot of guys there. And he got loaded up, and the driver said, I'm leaving. And there was a GI pretty close to Dad, said he had about 3 or 4 inches of a piece of shrapnel in his back, and he's hurting real bad, and he's screaming, and he's scared, and he doesn't want to die, and the whole bit. And Dad said, well, take him. He goes, I don't have any room. We'll lay him on his belly in between the cots on the floor. And he made that guy get out, or made that driver help him, and they got him in. I've always wondered if that man made it. I've always wondered what happened with his life. But to my father's testament, he stood up, got out of the ditch, One German could have killed them both with a rifle, but he did it. Now, I don't know what the disposition, obviously Dad made it. I don't know what they did later on. The way he talked, they just came in with a bulldozer and just put dirt over the damn dragon's teeth and drove over it instead of trying to blow it up. And all those men died doing that when a bulldozer or a blade on a tank did the job. Okay. Ambulance. Okay, Dad's injury. I don't know. Here again, don't know where and when. You know, Dad was armored engineer, and he handled explosives too. And I don't quite understand why they do it. They had some kind of program of setting up booby traps around, you know, like trees. And so a German comes up, stand next to a tree to urinate or walk past it or whatever, hits a trip line or something, blows up. Well, Dad said they train you, which makes no sense if he's accurate. They train you to reach around the tree and set it and put the pin in place and do all that, I guess, in case you goof up, protect you. Well, Dad slipped, and it blew off in his hand. And as soon as it happened, he couldn't feel his hand. It was his right hand. Yeah, right hand. And he couldn't feel it, and he thought, I've lost my hand. He pulled it out. The only thing he did was lost about 1/8 of an inch of his index fingernail. Blew it right off. But he could move his hand and everything. And he's thinking, Jesus, hey, I'm not crippled. So they send him back to the aid station. The guy looks at it and he says, you're going the rear. And Dad goes, doesn't hurt. I can move. Thank you. He goes, oh no, it will. And in about 30 minutes, Dad said he was almost screaming. Because the adrenaline wore off and the concussion was so great, it just bruised him real bad. And I think he had some hairline shrapnel in it or whatever. Well, that got him a couple of weeks in Paris, France. And he goes into Paris, goes to the hospital, and he said it was miserable. They put him on morphine 24 hours a day, morning, noon, and night. He said, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't stay awake, and I couldn't think. And just couldn't do anything. His head was terrible. Well, after 2 weeks, they released him, and he never said he suffered any kind of residual withdrawal or anything from it. Whatever. But this is what did piss him off. I don't know where they shipped him. Convalescence, I don't think. I think they sent him back out. You know, you're going back out. And during that time, he said the Germans surrendered, and he was always pissed. He missed out on that great big party in Paris on VE Day. The women and the booze and God knows what else. And he always hated that. He, as a side note, he hated the Army. He hated Franklin Roosevelt. He swore Roosevelt got us in the war. He didn't like anything about it, made no friends, and it just seemed like everywhere he went, it was bullshit training or just wrong timing. Now, with that being said, I went through some of his old paperwork here a week or so ago, and toward the end of the war, or I guess after, maybe right after the war, whatever, I don't have the date down here, he did, and he never told me about it, he did get a weekend pass to go to Paris. And he did get to go back to Paris, and I don't know what he did. The only when he was in Paris, he couldn't enjoy it because he was in the hospital. So whatever. Cliffs of Dover. Dad, I guess, I don't know at what time, the war's winding down or it's over, or maybe they're repositioning everybody for Pacific Theater or whatever, I don't know, but he's over in France somewhere. And he gets orders cut, and he has to go back to England. Well, what is it? 20 miles between France and England, whatever. Well, they put him on a plane. I'm pretty sure it was a C-47 transport. I think that was the designation. So he's on there, and I think there was a couple other GIs with him. Some cargo and a mop bucket. He always talked about that damn mop bucket. And the mop bucket wasn't tied down or anything. It was just damn mop bucket in the middle of the cargo area, fuselage. Well, they're on there getting ready, waiting to go and everything. Pilot's not there, and maybe the engines are running, I don't know. And pilot gets on and says, you guys ready? Yeah, yes sir, okay. So he walks across the fuselage and grabs a jute rope and brings it over the door and ties a square knot in it to hold the door. The latch didn't work on the door. There was a rope went across the damn thing, hold the door open. So they get in, And Dad kind of, well, okay. And then they get in and fire the thing up, and they're flying across the English Channel. And I guess and I'm assuming it's cliffs of Dover. Dad was saying it was cliffs, and I think he said they were white cliffs, so it probably was, because I think they had a landing strip up there at one time, and it would make sense. You just kind of drop in, and there you are. And he said they're going along, and he's looking at that, and he goes, oh my God, he's going to hit that cliff. Well, he wasn't. But, Dad, you're right there. You can get up next and talk to the pilot and stuff. They didn't care back then. And so they're going along, and and the pilot was either getting ready to touch or he had touched down. And there was a fighter plane that came in and dropped in front of that cargo plane. Just a woof, like this. And I guess he did it real close. And the pilot of the cargo plane Dad was in had to lay the brakes on. And when he did, Dad said, GI's cargo, mop bucket and all, are flying up into the cockpit, and Dad's trying to hold stuff back, and everybody's trying to keep from getting in the pilot's lap, and all this crap's coming up into the cockpit, and they get it under control and all this. He said that pilot taxied up to the whatever kind of air traffic control tower they had, and back then they just had like a vent window. You slide the window open. He said he stuck his head out of there and called him every name you could think of for 5 minutes. Because I'm guessing that controller gave that fighter pilot clearance to come in and damn near hit him. I think the way Dad talked, it just dropped right in front of him. But anyhow, that was something Dad never forgot. He always mentioned that mop bucket, trying to keep that mop bucket out of the cockpit. But whatever. So their dad is World War II, pretty much over, his exploits. And so now, he's coming home. And back then, it was either a week or 2 week ride in a boat across the Atlantic Ocean. And he didn't have anything memorable to say about it other than it was a floating, whatever boat he was on, it was a floating casino. The war is over. We made it. Hitler didn't kill us. And he said guys were betting paychecks they didn't have a month in advance. And I guess poker and pinochle was a big thing back then. Guys, penny a point pinochle. And I guess the way Dad talked, they just played for whatever it was, 1-2 weeks straight, and just played pinochle that whole time. But it was a floating casino. So, that is pretty much Dad's World War II era. Now we're going into, and that was the bulk of the neat stories. That was the stuff I remember that Dad talked about. The human interest stuff. This will be more facts and figures. So now we're into Harry Adams post-World War II up in Indianapolis. Dad gets discharged at Atterbury, like I said. He goes up to Indianapolis, lives in a boarding house, and I don't know the whole timeline, but he sends for Mom, sends money. And they decide to get married. And he sends her some money, and I think it's the first time Mom had ever been out of Pennsylvania. Gets on a train, comes up to, I don't remember what it's called up in Indianapolis, Union Station or whatever, the old, the wife's telling me that's right. The old railway station up there. And Dad picks her up. I don't know where he had a car, maybe he borrowed one. Picks her up, and I'm not sure, but I think they take off to Terre Haute, the next day or that night or whatever. And then they get married. Let me see if I can find the... he goes over to Terre Haute, or maybe he was staying over there with his brother. That could be. That's probably more logical. Marriage certificate, Harry J. Adams, Terre Haute, Dolores May, Duncannon, Pennsylvania. November 23rd day of November 1945. So the war's just over, and they're getting married. War bride type thing, Norman Rockwell. And I thought my aunt and uncle were witnesses, but I'm guessing not. I think they had the clerk and drug somebody out of the hallway or something, because these names are not that. And they've got a Helen O'Brien, and I think just one witness. And maybe just the justice of the peace was the second witness, kind of, sort of. Anyhow, they just got a civil ceremony and off we go. So, let me get some house cleaning done here. When Dad got out of the war, dealing with work, he went back to International Harvester up on English Avenue and worked up there. And he made comment, under federal law, if you went off to service and you come back, whatever your classification was or your job was or whatever, any raises that were given to that classification, you were supposed to automatically get them. Well, Harvester never did it. And Dad was quiet spoken. He may have been afraid he wouldn't have a job. That stuff's going on too. But it always pissed him off. He goes, here I go over there and get shot at and don't have a job. And I can't remember if I said this. Barbara, help me. I'm going to ask you to kind of give me a nod. Did I talk about how Dad was upset with my uncle for him not going off to war?
Yes.
And how my uncle made all that money?
Yeah.
Okay, I did talk about that. Thank you.
You didn't say how much your uncle made, though.
I don't know what he made. I'm going to touch on that real quick. That's kind of getting into post. Did I talk about his settlement check?
No. You
No,
didn't say that.
I missed that. And that may be in the notes here.
No, that was in the first notes.
Yeah, well, that was in another section.
Uh-huh.
Okay, thank you. Then I missed it. Then I'll touch on it. Dad, as I said, Dad was missed because my uncle sat back here and made all his good money and Dad gets shot up by Hitler. Well, it was interesting, in the 70s, like 72, 73, somewhere around there, Uncle Jess went out to the mailbox one day and opened it up, and I can't remember how much it was. I know it was at least 20. It may have been 40. I really think it was 20. There was a $20,000 check there, either from the union or, no, from the coal company. There had been a class action suit for black lung disease. And because Uncle Jess worked in the coal mines, either my grandfather or after my grandfather had gotten out of it during the war or before and after the war or whatever, he got a settlement. He didn't have any problems. And Dad, and it was just like an icing on the cake. Here he is, free money. And it was interesting, but that happened. And it just always kind of bugged Dad. But anyway, not too much, just like an itch you can't scratch. Okay, sent Mom, moved to Indianapolis. Okay, after they got married, they moved to Indianapolis. They were over on Hannah Avenue, had a home, and they also had a couple of boarding houses. Dad would buy a home and then section off a bunch of rooms, and because GIs were needing a place to stay, so he, took some old homes and turned them in boarding house. And made some money off of them. Ended up selling them. Mom hated it because Dad, I'm guessing, was still working at the Harvester and fixing this up on the weekend and making that work. And Mom had to change the linen and take care of the rooms and everything. She got, a lot of these guys are dirty. She talked some of them were drunks and urinate the bed and everything. She hated it. But they had one, sold it, and I think had another and sold it and made some money off that. Okay. Somewhere around there, and I'm assuming after all this of Hannah Avenue and the boarding houses, I'm assuming somewhere around there, it was in the 50s, and they bought a small home on East 26th Street in Indianapolis. It was east of Arlington Avenue. And as a side note, they lived there. Oh, I don't know. I'll get into it in a minute. But they lived there for a few years. And this was an up-and-coming area of Indianapolis. Times are good. Men are working at factories. The east side's really happening. And I may have it in here later on. Dad said, in essence, in the 50s and 60s, the east side was the place to live. It was a neat place to live. So anyway, and they made a lot of friends there. Over the years, obviously, people die, people move away, but there were a couple of families up there that Mom and Dad stayed in contact with up until they died, really. In later years after Dad died, Mom didn't go up there. I think maybe we took her up there once to gilt straps, but they stayed in contact until kind of sort of a phone call here and there until they died. So they had friends for over 50 years from up there. Okay. 90s. Okay, we're off on that. Okay, over there while we're over on 26th Street, or they are, I come along. 1958, I was born. And Mom was told she couldn't have any kids, and Mom and Dad were married 13 years, and then she gets pregnant. Big surprise. Won't go into all of that, but, that's part of dealing with Dad. And I'm going to touch on this. My grandfather, my dad's dad, in essence, I met him. I was just an infant, but he came up to Indianapolis. I think he's lived in Terre Haute or something, or wherever. And he came up, and there was a story. I don't know where they were at. It doesn't make sense. There was something, maybe this happened before I was born, but Mom told me he came up to visit. It must have been before I was born. Came up to visit, and somebody tried to break in the house, or they broke a window and came in or something. And my grandfather had a blackjack. You got to look at what that is. That's a striking weapon. And he told the guy, he either hit him a couple of times, and he may have, or he told him, if you don't get out of here, I'm going to kill you. But Mom always remembered that. I think Dad was out working, and this guy broke into the house. And that's real vague memory on that. My grandfather, he died of an aneurysm, so they say. Dad called it, he was in some type of small shack or one-room shack or something at, I don't know who. I don't know if it was an old friend's place or maybe he just had a small piece of property or something. I would have thought Dad cared for him and they got along good. I'm surprised he wasn't with Dad, but I don't remember. Maybe he had something out back somewhere. I don't remember. But he pretty much died a pauper with an aneurysm in there. And my father was the youngest of all of them, and for some reason I think he was my grandfather's favorite, and he always called him Joey. Dad's name was Harry Joseph Adams, and he always called him Joey. And most of the people in the family always called Dad Joe. So why, I don't know. In the 50s, Dad left the Harvester. There was a man he worked with named Achilles Angelico. Dad had a lot of respect for him. Probably second generation Italian, and Kelly came up and to him one day, and said, "Hey, they haven't treated you right at the Harvester. Let's start our own plumbing business." Because Dad was a steamer plumb fitter, plumber steam fitter, and they went in. And as a matter of fact, the rickety old metal stool that they used to sit on to do their books out in the separated one-car garage at Dad's property on 26th Street, that's where they started. We still have that today, oddly enough. A little humor, if you will, down here in the basement. Starting to think. There was one time Dad went up to Chicago to visit Kelly's family. I'm assuming he took the bus and then got a taxi up in Chicago. And there was a couple of stories on that. He took the taxi, give him the address, whatever, and gets over there and he pays the guy. And he gets out. And that guy, reaches his head out the window and calls Dad everything but a white man. And Dad couldn't figure out why. He paid him. He didn't treat him bad. And then I guess he got talking to Kelly later on, and Dad didn't realize. Remember, Dad grew up poor on a farm in the country outside Terre Haute. He didn't tip the taxi driver. I guess that guy got hot. And Dad didn't know any better. So Dad did laugh about it, when he told me the story. He just didn't realize what he'd done. So there we are, a little bit. Now, dealing with being up there at Kelly's mom and dad's. He said it was a quintessential big Italian family. Everybody sitting around, pasta mounted up high and all this. And Dad was small and skinny. And of course, these Italians, a lot of them pretty husky. And Kelly's mom would say, "Joe, eat, you're too skinny." Kept trying to pour it down him, he couldn't eat it. And he just talked about it. I think he had a good time with them up there. Okay, that deals with the trip to Chicago. I'll touch on this without a lot. Dad and Kelly got into business, and Kelly went on to be highly successful. I won't bore it with that because this is about Dad. But during their time in the plumbing business, they were successful. And Kelly hired a brother or brother-in-law, something like that. And him and Dad just didn't get along. Chicago overbearing personality, I don't know what, and Dad's quiet spoken country boy, as it were. And Dad just decided to get away. I'm Kelly, I want out, I want my half, or whatever. I don't know what was said. And Kelly was always hurt over that. He goes, Harry, tell me what's wrong, I'll make it good. And Dad never would. But those are the things that happen, men make decisions. But Kelly went on to be a multi-millionaire. I'll just leave it at that. Dad went off. This is sometime, I'm assuming they dissolved sometime after I was born. I'd have to look at the dates. But anyhow, Dad bought a piece of property over on Shadeland Avenue, 3610 North Shadeland, and there was a lot next to it. There was a home there with a detached garage and a lot next to it. And Dad bought the whole thing. And he went over there and put up a little block building, built it, must have had some money saved up. Knowing him, he probably did. He was very frugal. And built the plumbing business, Harry Adams Plumbing Company. Lived in the house next door. And were very profitable. There was one story he told me about when he first started the business. I don't know how far in, but I don't think he was in the business very far. And I can't remember exactly what all the work was that he did, but he got a job for either doing a plumbing in a variety of homes. I think it was apartment complex. And it was kind of a 50-50 deal. Here's 50 up front for materials and labor and all that. And once you're done, I pay the other. Well, he got it all done. And and I'm assuming it was right. You got to meet code and everything. So and Dad was a good plumber. He really was. And anyhow, he goes up to this guy. He goes up to the man that hired him. And he said, hey, I got it all done. Been inspected, blah, 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 whatever. I need the rest of my money. And he goes, Harry, let's take a drive. And Dad's thinking, what's going on here? So this guy drives Dad all around town. And I forget where all he went. At least one, if not two, warehouses full of appliances because he sold appliances or wholesaled them or whatever. And I think maybe another business or two or whatever. But anyhow, he was doing pretty damn good. And he happened to be an attorney. And then they get back to the office or whatever, and the guy looks at him and says, Harry, I'm not going to pay you. Well, wait a minute, I didn't. He goes, no, I'm just not going to pay you. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it because I'm a lawyer. And Dad said, I don't know if he was euphemistic or literal, but he said he was a crooked Jew lawyer. And Dad said it almost bankrupted him because he was so early in the business. They had to eat all that, and he had his men working for him and stuff. And of course, you got to pay them. And he rallied from it. He got out of the work and dug in and made it work. But he said it damn near broke him, but he never forgot that. But the guy just said, Harry, you can't do a thing about it. I'm a lawyer. So, one of those things that just happen in life. And I said this, living on the east side in the 50s and 60s was the place to live. You'd have to do your history. It was a fantastic time of Indianapolis history. So now that kind of brings us up. He's in the business, he's went forward, he's overcome the hardship of that almost financial break, and time's going on, and we're getting into, what are we getting into here? Probably the early 60s type thing. And Dad's kind of wanting a little place in the country. Say he wanted a little cabin and a pond to fish out of. Not a big fisherman, he just wanted some place to relax. I think he was doing pretty good with the plumbing business. Well, came down to Brown County and got looking around. Let me look at my notes here because we're going to be segueing into the next section here. And he found it. He found a little cabin down here. And it had 300 acres with it. And he bought it. And then as time went on, he worked the farm and still kept the plumbing business going. But it was getting to be too much for him, so he had to make a decision. And and this will segue in the next one. So as the years went on, I don't know when he got rid of the business, but he built a house down here. My Uncle Jess was a carpenter, Dad was a plumber, and they contracted out the stonework and the wiring and all that. But this family built this house that we're sitting in here. So as time went on, with Dad sold the plumbing business for just the inventory. Okay. Sold it to his foreman. Foreman came up with the money or whatever and just bought the trucks and the backhoe and all the plumbing fittings and rented Dad's house to run the business out of, because Dad kept the store building in the house into the 80s and rented them both out. And he rented the store building out, I believe at that time, to a guy who was selling used cars. So that happened there. Then, as I said, I don't remember how everything staged out. But then in 1965, we moved. Dad's out of the business, still owns the property and getting rent off of it. We moved to Brown County. And so that enters into the last segment of this. Harry Adams, post-Indy, Brown County, Indiana life, 1965 forward, or 1965 to his death. Dad built up the farm. It was in poor shape. He built it up and did so good. I don't know if it's Department of Agriculture or may have been like IUPUI type thing, or Purdue University or Department of Indiana Agriculture, whatever. But anyhow, they heard about it, or I don't know how. And they came down, took some pictures, and interviewed him. Now, it wasn't live, but they used to have like a Saturday morning RFD show on agriculture. And anyhow, Dad was on, because he had done that good. And they had, somebody had turned him in and say, hey, you really turned this farm around. Dad was one of the hardest working men I ever met. He built the house. I talked about how he and my uncle built the house, did most of the work. There was a situation, we've got 2 dug wells out here, 36 inches around, about 20 foot deep. That was the water supply we had till the 80s, whenever public water came through. And Dad dug them by hand. And he talked about one day he was down in one of them, and I don't know how far down, probably quite a little bit, and he got out, and I think about 20 minutes later, a bunch of it caved in. And he kind of chuckled. He goes, boy, I missed that one. I don't know if he shorted up after that or not, but he cheated death again, just like he did over there with Hitler. So, now there was another instance Dad talked about, and this was before, I think it was before he got rid of the plumbing business. And he was clearing some things out in the creek down here, getting some trees out and clearing some land and stuff. And he hired out some of his plumbers to come down, and haul, just do manual labor. And one of them, I think, was on a chainsaw. And they were cutting a tree down, didn't watch what he was doing. And Dad's out in the creek with a small bulldozer pushing dirt and rocks around, whatever. And he dropped that tree on Dad. And it came right on over top of him. Now this dozer did not have a cab on it. This is all open air. This is in the 70s. And it comes down and falls on him, and the trunk missed him. There's grace number one. Then, but it pinned him. There was like a couple of branches, one in front and one behind, and the dozer's moving forward. But, God with his graces, there was a limb that hit the control lever to drop the front blade, and the front blade just buried right in the ground and killed it and stopped it. Couldn't go because it dug too deep. It was pushing up against him, but it slowed it down enough he could turn the key off. Say, almost couldn't reach it, turned the key off. But almost killed him. He talked about that. And then they, cut the tree or whatever and dug him out of there. But that guy really screwed up. Dad talked about that. And that was another close one on the farm. There was something about Dad. I don't know. Wait a minute. Let me check my pages. Oh, okay. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. Dad always, he always prized a nice car. And the one luxury that Dad would afford himself was about every 2 years he'd buy a new car. Of course, he got top resale out of the other, but I was always kind of surprised at that because Dad was retired. We didn't go anywhere. He didn't put 20,000 miles on, 10,000 miles a year on a car, if even that. But he always wanted a new car. He had a couple of nice ones. The one I'll brag about is a 1970 Buick, and I didn't talk about us going out west. And I'll just mention that real quick. In 1970, Dad wanted to go out west. Took us out west. We went out there, saw his aunt, who used to be a chuck wagon cook on, a literal chuck wagon cook on the rail lines. She was probably in her 70s, and this was 1970, and that was interesting. She was at Denver, Colorado. I forgot about writing this down. And we went out there. We went out to Denver. We saw her. We went up to Yellowstone Park. Dad had me feed some of the bears, which I think was funny. We throw some hamburger or some lunch meat and bread and stuff out to them and drive on. Not supposed to do it. And took a tour around there, got to see rodeo and things like that. So that was really neat. That was really neat what happened. We took that tour about a week, and it was really neat. But anyway, I'd forgotten about that. Because I said Dad didn't have much recreation. He always had a fondness for the West. I think he was reliving some stuff because he was around 55 going on 60 at this time, and probably reliving some of his childhood being out. He always talked about out west. He loved it, and I think he had a good time in the CC camp at Yellowstone. Okay, just thought of that, kind of threw it in. Dad would buy a car about every 2 years. I don't know if this is here, and I think I missed it in my notes. Dad talked about when he got out of the war, he wanted a newer car. And he always said he wanted sealed beam headlights and hydraulic brakes. I don't know what it was, but that was two things. That just kicked in my mind, and I didn't see it in the notes. Okay, this is kind of, going out west, kind of sort of dealing with life in Brown County. He sold the farm in about 1972, but he kept right around 5 acres in the house here. So we've still got just a smattering of, or a smidgen of what was left. And I inherited the house, obviously. Dad retired at 55 with no pension, worked a couple of plumbing jobs. He was just too old, and he didn't need it that bad, and it was hard on him. Dad ended up growing a large garden and making a little money off of that, and he worked the stock market. So that's how. And Dad, Dad saved everything he could. He was real tight. He's tight about things, but I didn't hurt for anything. He was an excellent provider. And life was comfortable. It really was. Vacations, other than that thing out there to Yellowstone.
And that was just you and your dad, right?
Yes, I'm sorry. The vacation out west in 1970. Oh, and I got off. He had a 1970 Buick LeSabre. I didn't mention that. I got off track. Real nice car. One of his nicest cars. He should have held on to that for 10 years, but he didn't. But it was just me and Dad. Mom didn't want to go. And she stayed here at home. So it was just me and him. Vacations. Once a year, maybe twice, depending. We'd go into Pennsylvania for a week or 10 days. It's a full day trip in there and full day trip back. Visit and stay with Mom's parents, my grandparents, Mom's parents, and got to know my relatives a little bit. But we go in there twice a year. The other two vacations would be about twice a year. We would go over to Terre Haute, Indiana, because Uncle Jess lived over there, and he and Dad were, stayed good friends, relatively close through all the years. Some things Dad did for entertainment, and it wasn't much. Dad would sit around for hours at a time upstairs in his easy chair, and he had a footstool, and he'd play solitaire by himself. I mean, he wouldn't talk to anybody. He wouldn't do anything. And he'd just play solitaire. Thousands of games of it. I mean, I would have gone nuts. And he kept the house up and mowed the grass. Well, I mowed the grass. But he kept the house up and did stuff like that and worked the garden. But he just spent unbelievable time doing that. Now, and we're getting close. We're getting close, killing a couple minutes. An hour 14. I was hoping for 45. And I felt like I've been talking fast, but we're almost done. The other thing Dad liked to do was read Western novels, fictional novels. And he got every book he could from the Brown County Library. And he would read them, and sometimes he'd read them 2 and 3 times. He was always reading that stuff. He just loved the Old West. And he loved to watch Westerns on TV. But he never moved out there. And as a side note, one time, Dad talked about wanting to move to Florida. There was one vacation we took down there. I don't know where we went. He went down there, and he was saying, boy, this is really nice. I wouldn't mind having a little motel down here and just come down. Well, Mom wouldn't go, and that died a quick death. But he did. That was back whenever he was still trying to have a little bit of fun. But whatever, or enjoyed himself.
He did buy a piece of property in Port Charlotte.
Yeah, Dad did. I'll mention that real quick. Dad, sometime during, I think probably in the 50s, when all this land development was big in America, he bought a piece of property in Port Charlotte, Florida. Never did anything with it. Never went anywhere. And after Dad died, just by fate, a guy approached me who was a surveyor, and it was next door to his daughter. And I said, I was thinking about letting it go for taxes. And he goes, would you sell it? I go, what's the going rate? He came back with a cut, and we just sold it. But they never did anything with it. Thank you, Barbara. See, he played solitaire, Western novels. He'd go to the senior center, I don't know for how long. I don't know if it's a year or 2 or whatever, and play euchre on one night a week, Wednesday night or Thursday or something. So that, and Mom never went. Mom just wouldn't go anywhere for any of this stuff. She stayed here. But he'd go out and play some euchre and come home. There was a neighbor, first neighbor down here by the last name of Hertz. And Dad struck up some of a friendship with him. And there for a year or 2 or whatever on Friday or Saturday night, he'd go down and they'd play penny ante poker. And they were a little younger than him, but everybody got along. And they'd always have a couple of mixed drinks, and Dad would have a couple of mixed drinks and play penny ante poker and come home. So that entertainment. Dad had very few friends in his life. Now, he had more up in Indianapolis, and I won't go into all of them, but not a lot. Really not a handful. I can think of, other than the 2, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, there were 4 families on East 26th Street, and then a couple other business associates that he had that came down. But as time went on, as I said, people die, they move away, stuff happens. And down here, Dad didn't have 2 or 3 friends. And they were generally his age or older. And he wouldn't go over much, but he might go over once in a while, or they'd come by here and talk. But there was virtually no social life here with them. Dad really stayed by himself. Don't know what did that. Dad was a very quiet-spoken man, as I had said before, and kept to himself. And that's just the way he was. And now we're at the end. I hope I've said enough. My father died in this house that he and my mother and my uncle built. He died on a hospital bed in the living room on March 9th, 1997. And I think that's what he wanted. I think he wanted to die in this house. So that is more than I figured I would tell. I was trying to talk as fast as I could. As I said, to encapsulate this is the biography of Harry Adams. It's meant predominantly for my daughter Shannon, and any other family members we'll send the link to if you're interested, and I understand if you're not, over in Terre Haute and Pennsylvania. So once again, my name's Duncan Adams. I'm the son of Harry Adams, and I thank you for whatever time you spent listening to this. I wish you well and have a good life. Goodbye. That's it. And let me shut this one down.